Welcome to Disruption Digest, the podcast to explore the weird, the wonderful world of AI in plain English. I'm your host, Jamie Hugh. With me, as always, is my co-host, Jarrett Miller.
Hello, everybody. Glad to be back for another week and excited to explore more topics on AI and use cases of AI inside of businesses.
You bet. Today, we have a very special guest, Madison Coffin. Madison, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me on today, Madison Coffin. I currently work as a technical specialist and have spent the bulk of my career focusing on contact center technology and now all things AI inside of that.
All right, so we're going to start with a segment called JobsGPT, Madison. Essentially, what we've done is built a custom GPT, as it's called, JobsGPT, and all it does is respond to any kind of question we feed it as if it were Steve Jobs, okay? So every guest that we bring onto the show has an opportunity to ask one question to JobsGPT. So you have a question in mind?
One question. All right. How long do you think you would survive in a zombie apocalypse?
Oh, that's an excellent question. For me, I'll be immediately dead, but let me see. So how long would you...
You can give yourself more credit. You got jujitsu.
That's true.
I'm not sure that would work. A grappling sport. Yeah, a grappling sport would get me too close. I think I might need something like boxing or something. All right, I've got a great answer here. This is a good one. It says, given my penchant for black turtlenecks, I'll blend into the night, making me practically invisible to zombies. Plus, my ability to think different might confuse them into believing I'm one of their own, a visionary in a world of mindlessness. So I'll probably last until they realized I'm not launching a zombie eye brain. Then it's game over. What do you think of that?
I think I gotta add some more black turtlenecks to my collection here just in case.
Clearly.
Sounds like he's got a strategy.
Clearly. That's just outrageous. You know, it's funny that we got this whole segment going on, but for it to really understand these kind of questions and answer appropriately, it's just great.
Not only answer it, but also capture what seems to be the essence of how Steve Jobs would answer. Yeah. Just blows my mind.
Yeah, it's totally fantastic.
That's awesome.
Let's go ahead and dive into our topic of conversation for this week, and that's around contact centers. So, Madison, can you explain what a contact center is and how it currently works?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about contact centers, really it's the, heart of all customer interaction. So when you think about interacting with brands or companies, when you're calling, chatting, texting in, all of that really comprises a contact center. And it's changed a lot. If we think about what a contact center was 15 years ago, it was purely dialing up, waiting in queues, but now it's really shifted and evolved to offer all these different channels and points of interaction. And if we think about a contact center as a whole, obviously we have all of these different channels. We have ways that we can interact with these companies through self-service, conversational AI. But we also have the back end of that too for those organizations. So how their agents are able to connect with their customers, be able to escalate those conversations. And it also comprises how they manage and work through those cases too. So when we start to think about things like resolving inquiries, how we can surface knowledge inside of systems, all of that really comprises the modern contact center. And then with that too, after those calls are completed or interactions, how can we monitor that for quality assurance purposes as well?
Right. And a lot of that work is currently manual, right? And
yes.
It's surprising to me because we're talking about a really high volume of cases coming through. And does it sort of surprise you that it's so manual?
Yeah, I think I'm always surprised, especially when I have the opportunity to see how some customers or organizations are using their technology in a contact center setting. And you see a lot of manual processes. You see a lot of Excel spreadsheets to monitor, customer sentiment or satisfaction or the quality of those interactions. So it's definitely surprising to see that's how it's working on the back end sometimes.
I'll bet you that quality job is interesting. Can you imagine being a quality analyst, having to hear some of the horrible conversations? Thank you for doing the Lord's work. I'm not sure I could do it, but can you imagine? Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
There could be
that's
an
not a
interesting
job for the
blog out
week.
there. Tales of a call center QA analyst.
I would read about it. I mean, if you think about it, right, you're going to get all sorts of different interactions. And to your point, Madison, there needs to be a way to classify that, right? And if it's done manually, somebody has to literally listen to all these individual calls and figure out, okay, what happened, whose fault was it, and so on and so forth to make these improvements. Crazy.
Yeah, especially when you start to think about the times you may have contacted support very heated and angry in those conversations. So yeah, that's someone's job to actually mine through those calls and information.
And you can really tell recently I've been having to call into some different contact centers for different issues with devices I've been having or cell phone issues. And there's a huge difference in the quality of service that you get from people that you can tell have great tools and don't. So, I mean, just a few years ago, you talk about always whenever you call into a contact center, it's the worst because you've got to press about 10 different numbers in order to get to the right person. And then whenever you finally get there, you got to tell them who you are again. And then they don't have access to the right information. I think there's a huge shift that's happening recently. Are you seeing a lot of adoption or a lot more adoption recently?
Yeah, definitely. I think we're seeing a lot more modernization in general. Because I think, as you said, if we think about, our sentiment towards contacting companies and organizations and some of those negative experiences, it's really pushed organizations to start to think about how they can make that a better experience for the end customer, even if that's incorporating more self-service options or not having hold music for hours on end just to get in touch with someone. So I've definitely seen a shift where people are starting to think about how can we modernize, and with that too, how can we potentially use AI to make this an even more seamless experience for customers and agents.
Okay, well, let's focus on the AI portion, right? Which is AI assisting these agents in these contact centers. How can AI be best utilized, do you think, in those use cases?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think when we start to think about the ways that AI can improve service, we typically think about it in three different lenses. So, how can it support from customer interactions? How can it support from the agent perspective as well as the supervisor? So, if we break that down and start to think from the customer journey, adding things like conversational AI, whether that's interacting with a chatbot or when you call up, having that IVR that's conversational, not having to go through a decision tree. That's one way we can start to streamline that interaction from the self-service perspective. Now, from the agent perspective, there's a lot that we could do, especially with generative AI. One of the ways that we're really seeing a lot of impact when it comes to reducing handle time and increasing efficiency from an agent perspective is having AI assist in drafting some of those responses. So from emails to chat replies, having AI be able to cross-reference knowledge sources and give us customer-facing and ready information within seconds. And that ultimately impacts the customer journey as well. Additionally, when we start to think about the ways that AI can assist our agents, content summarization is huge. If you start to think about some of those cases that are escalated tier 2, tier 3, that have super long interaction histories, being able to summarize that within seconds is super pivotal when it comes to handle time and getting to, the crux of the issue much more quickly.
I agree. AI summarization is awesome. It's so good at it.
Yeah.
I use it all the time. Let me tell you, I am never reading a full chain email ever again. I'm sorry. If you send me a long email, don't expect me to read it. It's so good at creating the exact necessary key pieces of information, and it's really, really accurate based on the experiences I've had. I don't know if you feel the same way, Jarrett.
Yeah, I've even jumped into meetings somewhat late, and we have access to an AI tool at my work, and I'd be like, "Hey, what did I miss? Catch me up on this meeting. And within a few bullet points, I can be 15 minutes late to this meeting, but I can jump right in and start contributing value there and start contributing to the conversation. And I've never taken those bullet points of summarization and been off on the conversation, or at least not yet.
In some ways, I think it makes us all a little bit lazier. I know for me, I even use it with articles. Hey, can you summarize this article in 10 bullet points? So it's very effective, but also kind of funny when we think about the ways we can use it to cut corners sometimes.
You mentioned quite a few areas where we could use, or that contact centers could use AI. And it seems like throughout the whole contact center organization, and that seems like a lot. Can we break it down a little bit to make it seem simpler on how to implement? Maybe what are the prerequisites to get started? Because whenever I'm having conversations with people, they go, we want to use AI. We see everybody talking about it. We're pretty sure that it's going to be valuable, but we're not even sure if we're ready to use it. What do we need to have before we even jump in?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think a question that everyone should be asking themselves before they get inundated with the nuance and potential value of AI. I think a great starting point and question is thinking about the data you have. If you don't have good, clean data, if it's unstructured, if it's disparate, throwing AI on top of it won't solve all of the issues, especially in a contact center setting. So I think specifically in service, when we start to think about the data, if you have your customer master data in a green screen somewhere and your knowledge in a binder plus on SharePoint, AI is just, it's not in the cards yet. So I think it really starts with defining your core data strategy, making sure that you have access to that, and then thinking about the ways in your specific process that AI can help and add value.
So Madison, I want to go over some low-hanging fruit examples of where people could start to leverage their data to start using AI. So I assume that one of the major prerequisites is that the data that you're going to leverage must be in the cloud. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so what are some good examples of low-hanging fruit of data that companies have already put in the cloud that they could start to utilize and leverage that data for high-value use cases of AI?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, to be fair, data really is your greatest asset as an organization, and there's a lot of power behind that. I think as far as low-hanging fruit from a service perspective, on the first part of that probably would be your customer data, their purchase history, their service interactions, potential churn risk is something that we can look at. And I think additionally starting to track things like sentiment, what topics, if we have this data, are yielding higher customer satisfaction scores or lower. And that's something that we start to see supervisors or people on the customer service operations side start to use to define how they're going to evolve their contact center. What knowledge needs to be out there because we're yielding low sentiment scores around this specific topic. And I think beyond that too is looking at transcripts. That's data that most organizations have within their call center. If you have that in a structured format, you can do a lot with AI to start to understand what are your customers asking about, what do we need to train our agents on, and what's going right or going wrong within our contact center.
All right. Well, let me follow this up because this sounds great, but is there actual evidence of this type of technology of AI being effective in a contact center setting?
Yes, I think that's the million-dollar question, the elephant in the room when it comes to all things AI. And to be honest, there's not a ton of evidence yet. It is still, newer technology. And I think for those early adopters and early majority, they want to start to see some evidence. And we're starting to see something start to trickle through. I know at Microsoft, we evaluated our own contact center with generative AI, but there's also different papers and research that's coming out looking at generative AI assisting agents and the potential value that it can bring.
All right. Can we explore that in a bit more detail? That sounds very curious to me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I will share my screen. I want to talk through a paper. It's called Generative AI at Work. was written by MIT and Stanford researchers. I think there's a lot of good nuggets that we can start to look at here to really understand the potential value of generative AI in a contact center. All right, so here's the paper that I was referencing called Generative AI at Work. Now, this study actually looked at 5,000 contact center agents of a Fortune 500 company, where they studied them for 16 months and started to look at, how productive are these agents without an AI assistant versus, how productive they are with that, aiding them within their flow of work. And I think there's a lot of powerful statistics that we can look at within this to start to give us an idea of the evidence that you can see in a contact center scenario with generative AI.
So, Madison, would 5,000 agents, it's a lot of agents, and there's not, or most contact centers are not 5,000 agents, I would assume. So, do you know if this particular study is applicable to most contact centers out there? Or did you see anything in this study that would indicate, hey, even if your organization is not 5,000 agents, these results are still applicable to you?
So I think it's definitely still applicable to really any size organization. In fact, I think the fact that they studied so many agents makes it even more impressive. Because when you're thinking about a contact center of that size and scale and magnitude, and potentially the amount of cases that agents are working, I think the results speak for themselves. And as we start to, parallel this with smaller contact centers, I would expect that they would see similar results when it comes to productivity and, potentially reducing the time it takes to skill their agents.
Yeah, because a lot of times whenever we have these discussions with people, I will show evidence to somebody about some sort of benefit of AI, and they will come back and say, well, that's a good use case and evidence for this situation over here, but that doesn't necessarily apply to me. So it's difficult until you could find, or for the naysayers, until you find a study or an example that is their exact situation, they might try to brush it aside. So that's good that you think that this will be applicable to most other contact centers. And so let's dive into it a little bit and talk about the productivity impacts that you mentioned at the beginning.
Yeah, let's get into some of the findings. And I think this particular view gives you a good idea and understanding of some of those metrics that were tracked within the study and some of the potential gains that we can see with AI. So if we look at this top graph here, talking about resolutions per hour, we can see the red curve is representative of our agents' resolutions before AI. Now, if we look at that shift over to the right, that's what we're seeing as far as the curve and distribution of resolutions per hour post AI. So we're seeing that our agents are able to handle more cases. And if we look down, we can start to see things like average handle time and see that, post AI, we're seeing a pretty significant shift in the time reduction and time savings that our agents are getting with AI. And that's thanks to, things like being able to pull information from our knowledge base more effectively, or even start to have some of those tools like summarization like we talked about before.
And Madison, this is just controlling for AI, right? So there were no other further changes between the red curve and the blue curve. The only difference is this AI tool, correct?
Yes, exactly.
Wow. It's pretty impressive. I mean, it's very unusual to see technology affect a KPI that much, don't you think?
Absolutely. And when we think about, some of the costs associated in contact centers, being able to reduce average handle time with a technology by that magnitude it's pretty impactful when it comes to the bottom line. Especially if we're starting to think about how expensive phone minutes can be for a contact center. If we can reduce the handle time on all of these cases, we're really able to start to save these contact centers more money. And that's where we start to see that shift of a contact center as a cost center to a profit center. where we're able to, increase customer satisfaction, reduce that handle time, and let our agents spend more time making sure we're retaining those customers and potentially cross or upselling.
Yep. Don't try cross-selling, upselling to me, though. I'm going to say no. Stay away.
I don't know if you got AI trying to attack you and cross-sell you might succumb, Jamie.
You know what? That probably is true. I won't notice it, and I'll say, yeah, that sounds great. And then here I am,
Yes.
right? So one of the things I want to follow up on this, Madison, is looking at these curves. It looks like the entire population shifts to the right. So does it affect all agents equally, or is there further biases going on that we don't know about?
So, Jamie, to answer your question about, the impact that we're seeing based on tenure or if it impacts agents equally, I think this helps to illustrate here. So, if we look at these graphics, what we're seeing is, how we're measuring agent skill as well as tenure and the impact that AI has had on them. So, if we look to the left at Q1 of our least skilled, least tenured agents, we can see that the impact of the generative AI assistant was much greater than those that were more tenured and more skilled. So, really, what this assistant is able to do is bring those agents along the skilling curve, making a 2-month agent as strong as a 6-month agent using generative AI.
Oh, wow. Is that even fair for the more experienced agents, do you think?
I think the fairness could be relatively subjective, right? I could definitely see if you're someone who's been at the company for a long time, you really pride yourself on the customer service work you're doing, I could see how that potentially couldn't be fair. But on the flip side of that, if you are that tenured, experienced agent, you probably see a reduction of escalations and questions from these new agents as well. So it does free up additional time from those more skilled agents to focus on their work instead of having to help train and develop other agents as well.
Yeah, so I would imagine that improves everybody's lives, from the newer agent that has to spend a lot less time upskilling and stressing out about how to do their day-to-day job. And now the more experienced agent enjoys their job more because they're having to ask or answer fewer questions from these less skilled agents.
Yeah, absolutely. And it has an impact on, job satisfaction as well. Because if you think
Hmm.
about being able to accelerate your time to competency or proficiency, it ultimately is going to reduce some of those attrition rates too for the agents that feel like they're not quite grasping it. So I think that AI can really help when we're talking about getting agents up to speed and making them feel confident and competent within their line of work as well.
That's a great example of an unforeseen benefit of AI inside of these contact centers. Did the paper mention or go over any other unforeseen improvements or effects outside of productivity?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know I referenced them before, but just to add some additional color, the 25% reduction in need for escalation was a huge one. Additionally, with that attrition rate we mentioned, it was a 30% reduction in agent attrition,
Oh, wow.
which is huge. If we start to think about how much it costs to train and develop and recruit agents, to really reduce that attrition rate is a huge cost savings for any contact center. Additionally, too, within this study, they were able to see value within 2 months. So this isn't something that they deployed and had to wait a year to start to realize value. It's relatively quick when we're talking about implementing generative AI into our lines of business.
Well, this has to be because it's quite intuitive, right, Jarrett? I'm imagining we have a assistant that pops on the side of the screen. I can talk to it. It will answer questions. It's a very intuitive technology.
Absolutely. And when we start to think about the technology that has the most impact the most quickly, it has to be something that's easy to understand, user friendly, and very straightforward. And that's what we're seeing with generative AI in these settings. People understand it quickly, they see the value of it quickly, and they want to use it as well, because adoption is going to be a huge portion of whether or not your new technology is going to be successful in your business as well.
Well, the usability, and you mentioned something earlier about it just being embedded in your workflows. that's probably one of the most important things, because if people are having to go off to the side and it's not connected to the rest of your applications, then it's going to be difficult for people to adopt if it's not well embedded inside of their workflows that they like and use already.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think about embedding it into productivity tools outside of an agent interface, but how you could leverage it in an email setting or, unified communication setting too, that's where you also start to see that value if it's readily available and within their flow of work versus, something that might slip their mind during their day to day as a tool that they can use and leverage.
A couple or any drawbacks that the paper recognized or saw? Whenever we post about AI providing efficiency gains for employees, a lot of people are skeptical that people will be losing jobs because of these productivity gains. So did it talk about that at all, or any other potential drawback?
Yeah, I think, there's two main drawbacks. One, as you mentioned, is, potential jobs being replaced by AI. The second is hallucinations. But if we start at the first one, this is a real concern and it's happening across different workloads, not just service. And I think it is, to a point, something that will happen slowly over time, but we're not there yet. As it stands today, generative AI is meant to help supplement a human agent in their flow of work, for them to, revise what's being put out by the AI and still retain control. Now, as the, technology grows and evolves, I'm not sure what that looks like. And that is something that is a definite drawback as we start to talk about the ways that AI will continue to evolve and jobs that could be displaced by it.
Well, I suppose it depends on who you're asking, right? It's great
Yep.
for the companies. They'll be saying, thank you very much. I appreciate the cash saving. And they'll be laughing to the bank. But I think for most workers in the workforce, it's going to, to your point, very difficult to get away from the fact that it will probably displace some jobs.
I think that's something that, we have to think about too as a society, even from people who are starting to go into the workforce or prior to that. What skills do we need to focus on that can't be displaced by AI? I think it opens up an entirely different conversation there as well.
Well, what skills can't be displaced by AI, but also what new positions does AI open up? So somebody's going to have to, in each one of these companies, somebody's going to have to know how to manage these things, these applications, create these AI applications. So yes, I think it will displace some of these customer service jobs, but what else is it going to open up? And are the jobs that it opens up and creates going to be much higher value jobs than the ones that it displaces? And will it allow people to start to move up the rung and up the ladder of jobs that they might enjoy more than if they didn't have these types of tools, or if these types of tools didn't exist?
Yeah, that's a great question, honestly, and something that I'm interested personally to see as we continue to evolve with this technology and in this environment. But definitely something to keep in mind. I did, however, want to touch on, the other drawback that the paper mentions, and something that I personally see and hear come up all the time, which is hallucinations. And I think we have a lot of people who are a little bit scared or skeptical of the output that AI provides, especially when we start to think about, AI cross-referencing our organization's knowledge sources to send to customers. And the truth is, there still will be wrong answers sometimes. There will be hallucinations, but I think typically people overestimate humans' ability and humans not making errors. Because if we start to look at studies, typically humans make more errors than AI. So hallucinations might not necessarily be something that we should be totally skeptical about if we start to look at some of those studies as well.
Yeah, that's very fair. Well, Madison, it was a real pleasure to have you on the show today. We're going to wrap up. As always, great conversation. Appreciate your input on this one, Jarrett.
Appreciate the conversation. It was exciting as always.
Thank you both.